I think I'm doing okay. I had my COVID case, so I have that behind me for the moment. We've been through, I mean, 2 really difficult years, and it's been difficult for everybody. And, the business community, residents, government, none of us were immune from the impacts of this. We had to very rapidly pivot our workforce. And our challenge was we didn't want to have a lot of people getting paid and not doing work. We pivoted people to do jobs we needed during COVID that weren't necessarily the jobs that they had when they were, doing their normal day-to-day work. So rec workers became, operated centers for testing, and librarians were pulled into all this stuff. So we basically were able to maintain a pretty high level of county services through the pandemic. We made some really hard decisions, masking. Yeah, I wish we had done it 2 weeks earlier, because it was really clear that at the end of the day, masking was probably the #1 thing that actually matters in what you do. We started out without, no vaccines, no testing, trying to navigate this without knowing what exactly the virus would do and how it acted. All that took a little while to settle, but pretty early on, I'd say by the end of the second week, it was clear this was person-to-person transmission. And what we realized was that if we could break the person-to-person transmission, then we could cut down on the spread of the disease. So you'll see Montgomery County go from the first hit in the state, first 3 cases, I think even in the region, and then very quickly, the worst place in the region, because the thing took off like crazy here once it started. And to think that it started with 3 people is kind of mind-boggling. And then we go from that to being the best place in the region, because we applied what we knew. And when we realized that if we could break human-to-human contact, then we could put this thing in on a more moderate course. And that was the hardest decision to make, obviously, because breaking the human-human contact means keeping you apart from each other. And that was the decision we made. So whether it was occupancy limits or masking or closing some things, all those things actually made us safer. And once we got control of it, we were able to keep it under control. And we always had this test pad, because we went one way and the governor went a different way. And every time the governor loosened up, his cases spiked. And that didn't happen with us. And that was pretty significant. You always want to know, like, am I making the right decision? It was good to have validators all around you where you could see that if they went in a different direction, they were going to get different outcomes. So that's really helped. And what I feel right now is, we're in a lull. We don't know, we know there's another variant out there. It's going through Europe now. All the numbers indicate in major European countries, they're on an upward trend again, and China's on lockdown again. We're hoping that because we're so heavily vaccinated that we won't get hit the same way. And we're also hoping, and I think this is true, that we know what to do. If it comes back and it starts spreading, we'll just mask up again, because that will go a significant distance. And I think we know also that we need to get people into N95 masks, not just cloth masks, because there is a difference in protection levels. But I think we're in a much better position to manage this now. You've got treatments, and you've got adequate amount of testing out there, and you're sitting on vaccines. Now the vaccines are going to have to change. They're going to have to make one based on Omicron, but they're already working on it. That's one of the great miracles that we had nothing to do with directly. But the fact they discovered a vaccine and could implement it in less than a year is nothing less than a miracle, because this would normally have taken several years to do. So everything is kind of in the right place for being able to manage it, as long as we remember what it took to manage it the first time. So I feel like, we're in a much better position than we were when this started. But there is life beyond COVID. And that's one of the things about what we tried to do in my administration was remember that every problem we were facing when we came into office was going to be there after COVID went away. And so instead of saying, okay, we're taking a break from our job of moving forward, we actually continued to push things forward while we were dealing with the various forms of the virus. And so, the first thing we did is Cindy Katz and I went out, we did a listening tour. We went to small businesses. We had them tell us why they hated us and why they told their friends not to come here. I'm not joking about that. That's what people would tell us. If somebody says, should I come to Montgomery County? I'll tell them no. So we invited them in to meet with us and to find out, so what are the obstacles you find in Montgomery County? And most importantly, what makes us different than other people? And it's not really money. More than anything, it's the torture and the pain we put people through, the difficulty of getting through processes in the county. So Sydney and I did 5 or 6 meetings with the business community. And our managers actually came to those meetings. So people from permitting and procurement actually sat in those meetings to hear what people had to say. And then people went about going back with a set of recommendations to make changes. And we made big changes in our permitting department. It is a lot faster to get a permit now. It's a lot easier to get a permit now. In the old days, if you submitted a permit and an inspector came out and said, you failed this, you would be left to deal with it yourself. It's like, come, fix it and, call us when you're ready. Now we actually work with people. If we find something in the field that's wrong, we tell them what they need to do to fix it. We don't make it a mystery and say, you figure out what to do, talk to your architect. We let you rely on us to help you. And the same thing in the initial permitting process. When you submit your plans, instead of just saying, go bring your plans in here, we have pre-planned meetings where you and your architect and engineer can lay out what you're doing and tell us what you're going to need. And we'll tell you then whether you're going to go down the wrong path or not, so you can correct it before you ever come to us. So one of the big victories for us is we were able to deal with some major companies that had concerns about being able to get projects done in Montgomery County, including the possibility of not doing the project in Montgomery County. We reached out to them. We told them what we were going to do. We talked with our permitting people so they understood what they needed to do. And this wasn't where you just said, say yes to anything. It was because it's all got to be safe at the end of the day. We can't not do that. But it's how you help people get to safe and how you get people get to the right decision. And by helping in the beginning, people were able to get their projects done. There's a company called JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle. They do a lot of consulting for companies about where you should locate. And prior to all this, if you had gone to them and said, could the county get something approved and ready in X amount of time, they would tell the applicant, if you need a guarantee, I can't promise you anything. And what we've been able to do is to kind of turn this on its head and be able to get things moving and out the door faster. And the biggest victory is getting some of the applicants to actually be willing to be resources for other potential businesses and let them know that the county was able to and willing to deal with them differently than what we heard. I was very committed to changing the county's reputation because our reputation was not good. And so we worked on that. Procurement is, pretty similar. We had a pretty opaque process. It was pretty much old boys network. It is hard to change an old boys network. This is something, we're still going after because no matter what you do, there are ways people find around, your processes. You've been in the world of bidding, so you can imagine how this works. But we did 2 things I think were really significant. First, we made a decision to give local preferences to businesses. So if you're bidding on something, you get points for being a Montgomery County company and not outside Montgomery County. And the reason we did that was we realized if it's a Virginia company or a Prince George's company, they've got offices and space in another county where they're paying taxes, right? They're renting space in another county, storing stuff there. Their employees likely come from another county and they bring them over here when they're doing a job. So there's this whole secondary level of money that would circulate back into the local economy that we were missing. And so if we just evaluated price against price, we're missing whether putting money in a local company means that the county is going to see a lot of that money that we just paid out one door coming back to the county through another door. And we realize we do that evaluation when we're trying to evaluate whether a company coming into Montgomery County, they call it the ancillary effects. What are the ancillary benefits you're going to get other than the company simply coming there? And we decided to apply that principle to evaluating bids that come into the county. And the second thing we did to reinforce that is we gave a price preference to Montgomery County businesses. So all things being equal, we'll pay more money to a county business than a non-county business, which means this is not driven by the low bidder. This now comes down to quality of the bid, not the price of the bid. And that was important. So we've seen real growth in small business contracting in Montgomery County, of minority contracting in Montgomery County. It's generally been an upward trend now for 2 years. And we think that's because we've deliberately favored local businesses. We just added veterans preference to the list of preferences we had so that local small businesses with veterans get a preference for contracts in the county. So we've been able to capture more and keep these things inside the county. And I think that helps all the small businesses here. When you feel like you can compete here and you have a chance, it becomes a much better process. And we're dealing with the bidding process. I'm very unhappy with the way bids are structured. I've gotten involved in a couple of things, and I could see how very subtly bids can be constructed to steer contracts to people, even though there's nothing in there that's overt. But my favorite example is if you've got 200 points you can earn, and there's no direction on what's difference between 43 points and 37 points, you get the picture. I can keep things close, but always make sure that the person I want to win wins. And there's nothing anybody, the winner or loser, can go back to in the point system and say, well, it's clear here that this was only worth 37 points. And of course, this was worth 43 points. So we're working on changing that. I've had discussions about a process that's basically a quality first process, where you look at the quality of the bids and what you're going to get for it, or value for bid, and not focus on the price of the bid. So I think we continue to learn, because we thought we did things, and a couple of times it didn't turn out the way we thought it would turn out, and went back and looked at it, and we became aware of these other sub-issues that are in there. So I'm committed to making this as transparent as possible. You can go on the county website. You can see all the bids that are out there. You know who the competition is. Our goal is to make it transparent, but our goal is also to make sure the local companies and minority companies get as much of the bidding as possible. And we know within the minority spread that while in some categories, some minorities do really well, but categories tend to be dominated by different groups. And you find very low participation in some categories, and other categories, there's groups that get, the major amount of the business. And we're looking at how we can look at that and make sure that minority contracting isn't just in one field, but we've got the ability to make sure they can participate in more fields than that. So those are some of the, the big changes, I think we made in procurement. So, in the first year of the local business spend, after we changed it, went up 20%. And then after that, I think it's from $100 to $120 million next year, it went up another $9 million. So we're continuing to see growth in that spend. And I expect as more people get used to it. And also, folks in your community have to know we're doing this, which comes to another point that we've realized we need to have better outreach to the business communities. And so we've been asked to make sure that when we have information, we distribute it through the local chambers. And so you're going to start seeing us using you as a conduit, if we are not doing it already, to make sure that your members know about things. We've assumed over all these years that everybody knows. You go to, there's a place to look for procurements, you go there. Not everybody does that. And if you've got a history of never getting a contract, you don't know that the rules have changed in Montgomery County, that you actually have a chance at a contract now. So we're going to work with the local chambers to make sure we can put more of that information out at the local level so that you're in a stronger position coming through this. In the beginning of the pandemic, we gave out a lot of money to businesses. We thought, frankly, we were going to be open in June. So we originally planned for 2 months of, 2 months of a spend, and it was $25 million. Well, the $25 million evaporated, And then we don't have $25 million out there to spend every 2 months. And so we became much more dependent on the federal government than the state government. And the federal government really did step in. I've talked to tons of business owners who were able to take advantage of the federal program and the state program. When I go to see restaurant owners, pretty much everybody who's still standing can talk about their ability to get these loans. And some of them forgiven ultimately. They got them through the hard times of the pandemic. And I was lobbying the governor to put money out. I continue to lobby the governor to put more money out to the community. I think it's really critically important that we're able to better serve our communities who got hit by COVID and who lost job opportunities. We're doing other stuff. We're trying to bring childcare back. So we've been upping our spend every year. Last year, because of COVID, childcare didn't get used nearly as much. So we wound up with the $9 million unspent. Instead of using the $9 million to this year and say, okay, we just need to add 1 million because that's the 10 we expected, we actually added 11 million. So we've put $20 million into childcare this year to help people get back to work. Your workforce, you're probably seeing what we say. If people can't have childcare for the kids, they're not coming into work. They're not going to leave a little kid home alone. And if the wages aren't high enough, they're not coming into work because it's too much. So with working with the state, Montgomery County is going to continue to provide more subsidies to childcare so we can hopefully bring down the cost of childcare to families so that parents are more likely to go to work than decide to pay what I get and what I pay for childcare are too close together to make a difference. And I'd rather be home. So we're trying to deal with that. My bus rapid transit system is now actually being planned. You know, after all those years of being on a piece of paper, we started on Route 29. We built the first stage of a BRT. We're going to finish it from actually going to put it in its own lane from New Hampshire Avenue into Silver Spring. We've put a bus rapid transit into this budget that'll connect Wheaton to Rockville. So it connects the two ends of the red line, but these are two important employment centers. And obviously, if you get to Rockville, you get access to all the jobs up and down the red line there. So it's going to improve access to jobs in the county, and it's a big deal for, you know, folks who don't have access to cars. Same way that, you know, putting the BRT on the east side of the county on Colesville Road served the population that often didn't have vehicles and would spend hours getting to a job, you know, trying to ride a bus up and down there. We're going to be able to offer people much quicker transit, which we think will benefit businesses, because if people can't afford to live in downtown Bethesda, they better be able to get to downtown Bethesda. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to keep them as a workforce. We reformed the WorkSource Montgomery, which is possibly one of the worst run organizations on the planet. And this is something the council felt that I felt. So when we reformed it, we did this together. We got a new WorkSource director. He radically changed the way that organization functioned. We went from almost doing no work in minority communities and not doing upskilling work. They focused on, you know, they get you a job where you were. So if you're uneducated, they would find you a lousy job, but they weren't interested in that either. So they weren't even doing much of that. Now they're doing job training and upskilling the workforce so they can train people for the better jobs that are out there. And that's a huge improvement over where we were. So I look forward, they've gone from 5 employees to 35 employees, from serving very few people, mostly people who look like me who needed to be placed with their resumes. And now they're actually serving people who need to find work at the most basic level. I think we really do have good leadership over there. So we understand that we need to provide more opportunities in the county. We've got to address childcare and transportation. And a lot of it gets baked into what we're doing in the budget. And a couple of good things have happened. One, we maintained our AAA bond rating. And that's not a small thing, because that helps the county borrow for less money. And the less I spend on interest, the more I can put into projects. And we did that through the pandemic. And the other thing we did, which I think is a big deal. The county has always had a 10% reserve policy. It has also never achieved the 10% reserve policy. This year, we budgeted the 10% reserve policy because we've made the budget. In the middle of this pandemic, over 2 years, we were able to increase our reserves so that we could actually meet our goals. And that's important because people think of it, oh, it's just a number. The difference is when we weren't making it, we had to put millions of dollars into the budget every year to increase our percentage. So if you were at 70%, you might put $10 million added to the budget just to go into that reserve fund. We had to put no money into the reserve fund this year. All your tax money went to programs, not into reserves. And so being able to free up that as a drain on our economy is a big deal. We were able to go into the employee retirement fund. We're overfunded. So we were able actually to draw some money out of that fund to bring it back down to a more reasonable level of funding. And that helped create space in this budget that otherwise wouldn't be there. And the other thing that was big is the charter change. We had this vote 2 years ago. We changed the charter, which limited the revenues, but not the taxes, which was really weird. Like you could get an assessment increase, your tax bill could go up, and then the county would have to lower the amount of money we collected totally by lowering the tax rate. So it was very perverse. We weren't able to realize growth from new businesses. If, for example, Marriott, if they got an initial tax bill for like last year, we would collect that revenue. But if they, like this year they're opening, we wouldn't have collected the difference in their property value in our taxes. And if they paid the taxes, you would have had to lower the rate on everybody else to offset the taxes they paid, which means we always talk about grow the businesses, grow the economy so you can realize the tax benefits. We had a system where if you grew the economy, you shrunk your tax revenues. Not a good system. So, and thankfully, you all were part of this and getting this changed. And that's a big deal for Montgomery County. So, we're into my budget now. I'm excited. It's the first budget I'm excited about. The last 3 years of budgets were basically less than 1% increases over the previous year, which just wasn't even inflation. And so you can't do much new when a budget goes up 1%. You know that you operate a business. If you budget another 1% in expenditures, you're not doing anything exciting with that. And so the county was trapped. COVID was a problem. The first year of the old tax regime was a problem. But this year, it's amazing. Property values have come back. Both commercial property and residential property are healthy. There's competition for commercial spaces in Montgomery County, particularly life sciences, and it includes converting offices and other warehouses into life sciences properties. When I came into office, we had a shortage, for example, of lab space, and nobody would build lab space here. Last week, I was talking about we've got 3 million square feet of lab space under planning and under construction. This week, that number is 4 million of lab space. And there will be another announcement in a couple of weeks. That's probably going to take us to 6 or 7 million square feet of lab space. This is huge. We've landed big companies. Just announced today a company coming from California. Horizon Therapeutics came here from Ireland. We were in competition with Philadelphia. One of the principals lived in Philadelphia. We won. I went out and met them on site, talked to them about what Montgomery County was going to do, where we were going to go, and they picked Montgomery County over Philadelphia. You will see a lot of new companies coming into Montgomery County. That grows our tax base. These are good jobs instead of retail jobs, which do not pay enough for people to sustain themselves. So we're getting good jobs back into the county, which is why our revenues are growing. When people tell you that people are fleeing Montgomery County, people are not spending 10 and 15% more for a house this year than last year because they're fleeing Montgomery County. There's competition to get houses in Montgomery County, and that's because people understand this is a good place to live. And I think, we're on a good trajectory. I came in and I always got knocked for, people would say you're anti-business. It's like, first place, My gripe was with the developers because we didn't get infrastructure. So it wasn't business. It was about, am I going to get the transportation and schools that I need? Because if I don't get that, people don't want to be here. And if you have to pay for it, I'd have to raise tax rates on our residents, and people don't want that either. So the ability to get businesses to pay for the infrastructure we need is what I've been asking for. And I'm making good deals. I have pretty much signed every single project deal that's come in front of me to go forward, every single one, because particularly when you're talking about high tech and life sciences, they all pencil out. You can look at the employees they're going to be bringing in, multiply their salaries, calculate the tax rate, and I'm not giving away more than I'm taking in. I'm taking in more than we're giving away, and it's a good thing. So I've been very aggressive about doing that. I've been out meeting business leaders to make sure they get the message that we're in business in Montgomery County and we're serious. I know I play against type, that people expect me to be very different, but the stuff we're doing is getting us the money I need to support the social side of the budget and the school side of the budget. And it's getting people better jobs in this county, and it's going to lead, I think, to a much brighter future. So we've got a lot of money in this budget for climate change. My capital budget had $433 million of projects that have climate change elements, like changing our entire bus fleet, that kind of stuff. This budget provides the operating. So the staff in the climate change offices that'll help businesses figure out how to make their buildings more efficient. We've got an EV buying co-op for individuals and fleets. So we're going to help fleets get quantity buying deals on electric vehicles from electric vehicle manufacturers. We're putting chargers out there. We're working with Pepco to put chargers out on the street so we can get away from the fear of range anxiety. Where am I going to find my charger when I run out of electricity? We gave record funding to the school system. The schools asked for $183 million more than the county council gave them as a guideline back in February. $183 million. So I started out, I found about 72, so I was going to give them 72 million more. And then I got their budget, and they were like, what they're asking for is just astounding. We got up to 147 million of what they're asking for. We're very close. And the only two things we're not going to give them are, they created a separate fund for their healthcare fund. It's $30 million. Then it's like a reserve fund. County charter says that the council is not going to appropriate a reserve fund to the schools. And my reserve fund covers the schools. My reserves are almost $600 million, 10% of all the spend. So if the schools run short, we are supposed to be the reserve. So I told them I'm taking 30 out there, and we're going to be your backup, so they won't risk anything. And sort of kind of fussing over 20 million. They've got $272 million the federal government gave them for dealing with COVID and for things they're doing in the school system to address COVID. They put not a drop of that money in this budget. So we've asked them to find 20 million and put it in the budget. That way you've got everything you want and we can go forward. But our budget, the money we gave them, funds all the teachers, all the salary increases, all the benefits, and every single program they had. So I hope we're going to reach a peaceful conclusion with them. But even if we fuss about it, it is record spending, and it's going to help us recover from COVID. My budget, I have 42 million left in federal funding. We didn't put it in the budget. We didn't spend it. We're reserving it in case we need more money to support the community over the next year. So rather than appropriating it, since we were so healthy, we could meet all these needs without doing that. We left it aside. So I'll stop there. I was very excited yesterday about my budget because it's the first time since I got here that I could create a budget that reflected my values in any way, shape, or form. And my first budget, when I got here, I took office, December 4th, 2 days later, they called me downstairs and said, you have a $45 million hole in the revenue shortage. You have to cut 45 million out of your first budget, which was Ike's budget. It was the budget I was in. And by March, the state came down and said, you got another $50 million hole in your income taxes. So I had to live with $90 million in cuts in my first budget, which affected not just the one we were in, but the one we produced. And my worst experience was sitting there with all these grants and programs and trying to find, how do I cut $90 million away from people who thought they were getting $90 million? It was the most painful, unpleasant thing I've done since I was elected. And I'm so glad that I could look at budgets this year and say, what can I give you more?